Well, I'd like to call this meeting to order on February 13th, and due to conditions, we're conducting two in-person meetings, one in our Farnell Avenue office in Santa Maria and one here at Santa Barbara County Education Office in Santa Barbara. Glad to see my friends and colleagues have arrived safely. Thank you for making the journey. Um, in terms of our Spanish interpretation, we'll provide live simultaneous Spanish interpretation of this meeting, and it'll be available for those viewing online. You can simply select that option. And now let's rise and salute the flag, more important now than ever. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good enough.
Yeah.
And now we'll have roll call.
Okay, Mrs. Alvarez Flores.
Here. I don't have a button to push.
Dr. Armistead.
Present.
Mrs. Cardy.
Here.
Ms. Ehrman.
Here.
Mrs. Frost.
Here.
Mrs. Reed.
Here.
And Mr. Walker.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Seeing as there are no changes to the agenda, we'll go into president and then board comments for anyone who has anything to report. For my part, we are, faced with almost a whiplash level of new information, and a lot of it is very disturbing and uncomfortable, but I wanted to add something really wonderful that I encountered recently. Through the Arts and Lectures program, I was really honored to attend a performance by a band called La Santa Cecilia, and they are a part of the Viva el Artes program in Santa Barbara. During this performance, and I should add also that Viva el Arte is a collaborative effort through the Office of Arts and Lectures at UCSB, Isla Vista, PTA, Marjorie Luke Theater, and Guadalupe. So at this particular performance, the performers shared that they had been in Santa Barbara previously and had a really meaningful exchange with students at Los Prietos Boys Camp and Santa Maria Juvenile Hall. And they shared stories of, obstacles and just challenges in their lives. And the band members shared their stories, which were very similar. And the message was one of hope. But the good news is they won an Emmy that year. And when they went to the Emmys, their acceptance speech included a reference to Los Prietos Boys Camp, their friends there, and the message was one that they would just not forget them. We have not forgotten you. So I thought that was really a positive way to kick off our meeting today. Wanted to share that. Does anyone else have an announcement?
I just have two comments. First, I just wanted to report that I was able to go see Beauty and the Beast, the play at Isla Vista Elementary this year. And HR Director Emmy Ramos was able to join me, and we had a great time. And they do this programming annually, and I had the pleasure of being able to go with Superintendent Solcito last year, and it's just always a great time. It's always a packed house. I believe the tradition started early in the early 2000s with Isla Vista teachers and community members, and the people who started, the teachers and community members, are still involved, even though their children now are grown, just to show you like the continuity of the program and just to see the community coming together to support the students, from the direction to the costumes to the stage design. And then thinking about everything that the students learned, just being able, the reading they had to do, the memorization, the public speaking, it just really exemplified just educational excellence. And it was a really feel good experience that I felt everyone wanted and needed at that time. And then also, I just want to say happy Black History Month to everyone. And just a fun fact, this Black History Month started as Negro History Week in 1926 by Carter G. Wilson. And it was decided to have it on the month of February because it also commemorated Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass's birthdays. And I just think that this is a great way to exemplify how diversity is our country's superpower, and that it's the thing that really makes this country truly exceptional. So, yeah, thank you. That's all.
Anyone else?
Oh.
Yes, Judy.
If I didn't know if you were going to call on people or if you were waiting for volunteers. I attended the SBC SBA Zoom meeting last week, and I think the most noteworthy thing was when we went around and all of the school board representatives talked about the status of what was going on at their schools in the way of attendance and concern with issues that were impacting their students. And it was very informative indeed. I don't know if Susan, I don't know if you were on, if you list.
Bridget attended that meeting on my
That's
behalf.
right.
Yes.
Did you have anything I forgot that I should say? No, okay.
Thank you, Judy. Any other comments from the board, either live or virtual? If not, I'd like to check in to see if we have any public comments today. None here. Let's just check in the north.
There are none here.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing none, thank you. Now we'll get to move into our first presentation. If you recall, last month, we had a really incredible presentation on the various divisions within SBCEO. So in keeping with that, our Associate Superintendent of Administrative Services, Steve Torres, is going to provide us with an overview of the County Office of Education's budget structure. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. All right. Oops. All right, there you go. Good afternoon, and I'll give you just a moment to get the slides to follow along, but it is my pleasure to present the overview of the SBCO budget. And the information that's going to be shared today will be more general than what's going to be shared with the proposed adopted budget presentation that will take place in June. This presentation is intended to provide an overview of the overall structure and components of the budget for a County Office of Education, as well as I'll share some examples of SBCEO's budget in that context. And so the topics addressed today will include the budget reporting timeline, our board budget committee, some of our revenue sources, local control and funding formula, LCFF, I'll say that a few times throughout the day, restricted funds and grants, as well as how we use general fund contributions, and then an overview, briefly, some highlights of the 25-26 state budget since we have the time today. I'd like to begin with our budget objectives. You know, we believe that our budget should communicate our priorities. To that end, we are always adjusting and evaluating our budget to ensure that it's aligned with our organizational mission. The budget is intended to connect students with specialized services and deliver direct instruction. The budget is intended to connect educators with professional development and career growth, and it's also intended to connect local districts, charter schools to services and support that are essential for planning, operations, and fiscal integrity. And so there's four major budget reporting periods throughout the year. The first is our adopted budget. And we do that in June of the prior year. And when we build that budget, we use current year data as well as the state projected budget information that we have from the May revision. So when we do that in June, that'll be for our budget in 25-26. At first interim, that's our first opportunity to update our budget. And so we do that using our principal annual data from the previous year. We would have been able to collect it at that point, as well as our expenditures through October 31st. And at that point, if there was any changes from the enacted budget from the May revision, those will be reflected in that first interim report. And we bring that to the board by December 15th. And we kind of repeat the same process at second interim. We now have our first principal reporting data, which is kind of our start of the year data, as well as our spending through January 31st. We wouldn't have seen any changes in the enacted budget at that point. If there's any changes in enrollment, attendance, local property taxes, that'll all be captured somewhere in between first and second interim. And then the following October, when we're able to close the books for the previous year, that's when we're able to produce our unaudited actuals. And if I were to add another circle in between second interim and unaudited actuals kind of above it, we're actually starting our budget, our adopted budget for the following year. So our budget cycles from year to year overlap before we close out this year. So this fall, we closed out this year's budget and we're already into this year. So a little bit of an overlap there, and it's a continuous cycle. And I wanted to highlight our board budget committee. They review and make recommendations on SBCEO's budget. They do this during our adopted budget first interim report and second interim report. Their input is always extremely valuable and helps to provide insight into our budget for us to be able to make changes and updates throughout the year. Our committee members are Judy Frost, Vita Marie Alvarez Flores, and Guy Walker. And so we're always greatly appreciative of the time and energy and input that they provide. And so I wanted to talk and kind of start off the actual budget mechanics here with an overview of our revenue resources. What you'll see here is kind of just a breakdown of our overall revenue by percentage. And what you'll see is that approximately 76% of the overall budget is restricted. And it's restricted in the areas of I'll start from the bottom, early care and education, and then restricted special education, as well as children and family resource services and career technical education. So you'll see that the LCFF, which is the state's funding formula for LEAs, which includes school districts, charter schools, and county offices of education. For us, it's only 28%. And I'll go into more detail later on about how that compares to school districts and one of those major differences between a county office of education budget and a school district budget. But I will start with LCFF, even though it's a smaller percentage of the budget. It's important to understand because we know it is the state funding model. And so prior to local control funding formula, which was enacted in 2013-14, the old model used to have a large number of categorical funding sources which were intended for very specific purposes. Districts had to use them and county offices had to use them in a very particular way, following very specific rules. There was also a component of revenue limits, which was based on per student historical numbers. And so in moving to LCFF, the goal was to promote equity, to provide districts and county offices of education with the funding that they needed to serve the population in order to serve their population. So this included a base grant, which includes grade level adjustments. So additional funding for those grade levels that maybe require a little bit more attention and resources, as well as a supplemental grant and concentration grant that was intended to provide resources to schools to meet their high needs, the demands of their high needs students. And so beyond the 2013-14 change to LCFF, around 2017-18 is when we saw some more changes to increase funding for county offices of education. In my presentation, or my portion of the presentation last meeting, I talked about this jump in LCFF funding for county offices, or for us in particular, in 2017-18. And here's just a little more background on that. So in 2017-18, and I would say that all this funding was intended, and I'll kind of walk through a couple of significant changes in Budget Act, but all of this was intended to provide additional resources to county offices of education for their support of districts' LCAP, as well as districts' continuous improvement efforts. And so in 2017-18, there was additional funding for LCFF entitlement for COEs based on the number of school districts within their county. So if we're providing support for LCAP and continuous improvement, the more schools, the more funding, or the more districts, the more funding. In 2018-19, there was a base allowance, kind of a standard amount that was provided to COEs, as well as additional funding to address the number of school districts that were identified for differentiated assistance. And then in 22-23, charter schools became eligible for differentiated assistance. So additional funding was provided for those charter schools that were identified in need of differentiated assistance. So differentiated assistance are those districts that are identified as having a particular student group that's not meeting the standards in certain areas. And so there's a list that's produced every year. Those we provide support to those districts in order to help them sort through their data, identify the needs of those students, and provide the services that they need. So it's kind of a hands-on approach. Curriculum and instruction does that work very closely with the districts. So given the more that we have, then, you know, the more support that we would have to provide at our level. Yeah, thank you, sorry. New terms. And then lastly, 23-24, there was additional state aid provided for our court and community schools. They were always underfunded in terms of being able to have the funding they needed to operate. And so there were some adjustments made to that base there. And so the components for a COE, and I'll talk, you know, for school districts, theirs is based mainly on their enrollment and their ADA. Predominantly, that's how all their funding in LCFS is determined. For COEs, it's a little bit different. We have an operations grant, and that's funding for the oversight responsibilities that we have for the districts. And the way that's calculated is using that minimum grant amount, as well as using the number of school districts within the county and the ADA in the county. Then we have funding specifically for our alternative education. That's for our juvenile court and community schools. And that's the factors that contribute to the calculation of that amount is the ADA in those court and community schools. And there's also a supplemental and concentration grant for our unduplicated percentage of targeted students. So that's kind of more along the lines of what a district is, but it's a very small portion of ours because that population is less, of course. And like I mentioned in the previous slide, that additional funding, there was these two base rates for a county office of education operating at least one juvenile court school and at least one county, one community school. And so, you know, when we talk about LCFF, the concept is that if a district or a COE doesn't have local property taxes that meet that calculated LCFF entitlement, then state aid would be provided to bring them to that level and ensure that they have the funding identified for the students that they serve. So LEAs whose property taxes do not meet that, you know, they'll have that additional state aid. For districts and COEs whose property taxes exceed their LCFF entitlement, it operates a little bit differently. So for districts, they get to keep those excess property taxes, and we call those community funded districts. For COEs whose property taxes exceed their LCFF entitlement, they must return those to the state, and that's intended to fund trial courts. And so on our budget, when we adopt the budget in June, you'll see our excess property taxes for SBCOE go in as a revenue, but they'll come right back out as an expense. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, microphone? Sorry, your microphone? Yeah, sorry about that.
Which local districts refer to as basic aid.
Yeah, basic aid community funded are synonymous. So those are the districts whose local property taxes exceed their entitlement.
Okay. So I get those two, the revenue limit versus basic aid. So why does the COE, why do they not get to keep the excess?
Yeah, so that was legislated at the time that LCFF was adopted. There's been conversations and there's been arguments made as to why we should But it's stayed that way since the inception of LCFF. It was determined and legislated.
If we did keep it, those will be funds that we might be able to use to help revenue limit schools.
So if they did come to us as LCF funding and we're able to retain it, they would be unrestricted. So the use would be able to be applied to a variety of things.
So I guess this is probably you, Susan. We, through you, lobby some, okay.
And I will say, yeah, wonderful question. Thank you so much for asking it. And the advocacy, the arena around advocacy for county offices in keeping their excess property taxes has been very strong. But the appetite for taking it up in the legislature isn't as strong as COEs who want to have it, you know, so there's been other priorities for sure. And it's, you know, it's really around supporting students, supporting districts, what we could do with it. But it is, as Steve said, currently used for trial courts in throughout the state. Yeah. Thank you.
I think you good questions. And I'll kind of wrap up the LCFF conversation with just, I talked about the difference in the formula for districts and county offices of education, but also just highlighting the difference in the amounts. SBCO in our budget, our percentage that is LCFF revenue is only 28%. And in that original pyramid that I kind of showed, it showed there, and then, you know, those other ones being unrestricted funds. I mean, restricted funds, I apologize. But for a district's budget, you'll see that 80% of their budget on average is LCFF funded. So given the unrestricted nature of those, then it obviously affords them more wide use of them. And that is the intention of LCFF, that there's local control and those districts are able to use the funds in the way that they determine best meets the needs of their students.
So again, this is another one. Since we've moved to the LCFF model, can you maybe just speak briefly to funding for district schools versus charter schools? Does this put them more in how the money's can be spent? I guess that's really what I get to. Yeah,
so when I mentioned LEAs earlier, I think I might have just said districts and county offices of education. There are independent charter schools that are also their own LEA. And so they would receive funding according to the same formula based on their enrollment, student population, and then they would be given those funds directly to use as they determine as a school the best way to serve their students.
Good. Independent as opposed to district charter.
Correct.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, you're welcome. And so just a little bit about then what is different, what might appear different, and when you see in district budgets and COE budgets. Since a small, you know, we mentioned that a small percentage of our funding is from LCFF, so that means that a small percentage of our funding is unrestricted. For districts, conversely, they have more unrestricted funds that they're able to use, and the majority of that is spent on staff. COEs have multiple management positions in order, and that's necessary in order to lead the countywide work and services and support that we provide to districts and the community. Districts, because they're operating primarily schools, they're going to have more teachers and staff working directly with students. And then another unique feature, probably more to COEs, is that we have fees for services, contracted work, excess billing costs, kind of in order to, you know, operate some of those programs and services. And so this is the budget image that you'll see when we do our adopted budget. I only show it here to show that as an expense, or if this is reflective of our expenses within our budget, you'll see that student support services percentage is very close to the percentage of restricted revenue that I showed you in earlier slides. Student support services include special education, early care and education, career technical education, children family resource services. So because it is restricted, it's determined and dedicated directly for those programs. And of course, when we go into the adopted budget, we'll go into more of what those specifics are within those, but I just wanted to show that the budget does reflect kind of the revenue and the nature of it. So a little bit about, a little bit more going into our restricted funds. I think, we know what they are. They're set aside for specific purposes, and they could come from state and federal sources. And they're used for the purposes, whatever those purposes are outlined either in the grant or the legislation that was assigned to those funds. And again, that's about 76% of our funds, our revenue. So down here, I included one example from a few of our programs. But it's important to note that each of those programs has several restricted funds. And so within them, some of those could overlap for similar purposes, but some are for that program for a specific purpose. So you'll kind of see layers of restricted funds within each of those programs or departments. And on the grant side, grants could be restricted or unrestricted. And they are financial awards that can be used for a variety of programs and initiatives. And they can also come from state and federal resources. What's not on this slide, but it is worth highlighting, is grants could be competitive. They could be based on a formula, and they can be a block grant. So ones that kind of come to you automatically. And we have all those types here at SBCEO. And again, an example from a few of our programs, but all of our programs have various grants, both in most cases competitive and based on a formula or based on a block grant that help to support their programs and various purposes within their programs. Yes.
Sorry. I should know this by now, but okay. So when we were talking about the LCFF funding and the state aid versus the property taxes, in our case, we have to return the excess property taxes. If we were to receive a competitive grant and had additional revenue, that would be something that we would be able to keep, that would then roll over to the next year, correct? Or how would that work?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And those grants all have not only stipulations in terms of how you can use them and for what purposes, but they're also tied to a specific timeline. And if they're not spent in a year, you lose them. Some you have, multiple years and they'll carry over. So, but yes, they're above.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I wanted to mention general fund contributions. Like I said earlier about our alternative ed, for the longest time, it wasn't fully funded, meaning again, the operating expenses were higher than the revenue designated for that program. When we encounter that situation, we can use our unrestricted general fund to support those programs, to provide them with the resources that they need to effectively serve their districts and the families. And so some examples of that we wanted to highlight was our school safety liaison. So contributions from our unrestricted general fund are able to be used to meet a need that we felt our districts had in terms of coordinating efforts towards safety. Other positions include director of CFERS, director of PI, which is Partners in Education, directors of the Children's Creative Project, and a director of CTE, and a coordinator for special education. So as we mentioned, with the objective for our budget, which is to, support the needs of our program so they can support districts. These are our districts and community. These are some positions that we identified as of significant need. And lastly, I'll just kind of wrap up with some highlights, like I said, from the state budget. To give you some idea of where Prop 98, which is the guarantee in the state for funding for education, for next year, it's estimated at 18.9 billion. This year was projected at 19.2 billion, so very steady, and that was an increase from 23-24. So all that to say that the funding or the guarantee for funding for K-12 education in the state of California looks consistent for the upcoming year. So that's a positive.
So,
yes. Yeah.
I think I sort of know these numbers. So all that money turns out to be around $14,000 per kid. I mean, ultimately that's what we're doing. We're taking this money and we're saying, what does that mean per kid?
Yeah. So there's
Per
a
student?
Yeah, there's a per pupil base in that LCFF calculation, which is which is kind of a flat number per student. And then there's additional supplemental and concentration grant funding based on the number of, high needs students that you have, a designated population. So to break it, if you were to average it out back down to there, that number, I could get you that number, but I don't know off the top of
That'd
my
be
head.
helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I know local districts look at it from the standpoint of, ultimately, what do we, if your revenue limit, what does that mean per pupil?
Gotcha. Yeah. So what I could provide you with is there's a like per grade level. I talk about grade level adjustments. It'll show what the rate is for a student at K through 3, 4 through 8, and then high school.
Yeah.
And then it'll show what's the additional funding for certain populations. So yeah, I could definitely provide
Great,
you with that.
thank you.
Yeah. And all of Prop 98 isn't all of LCFF. LCFF is part of that. So that's why the per pupil rate isn't just the division of this and the number of students. So yeah, I think that'll help to explain it a little bit more. The budget does include a COLA, a cost of living adjustment of 2.43%. So they take that LCFF rate and then they apply this COLA to it to get the new numbers for the upcoming year. And there's also some categoricals that are within LCFF, and many of those get the COLA as well. We have some programs like Universal Transitional Kindergarten and Expanded Learning Opportunities, which are kind of after school, outside of the normal school day activities, which are kind of ramping up their implementation. There is still funding in the budget to support the further implementation of those programs. And this year, there was a one-time student support and professional development block grant that's in the budget for districts. So that'll be new this year, one time. It's additional funding above and beyond their LCFF. So all that to say that it, for the upcoming year, budget looks positive statewide for K-12 education. And then I'll take any other questions you have.
I have a
Yeah.
quick question. Thank you. That was very informative, even though we've been, I've done the budget a couple times. It's nice to get the refresher.
Yeah.
So definitely appreciate that. I just wanted to know, do we receive any federal funding? And if so, how does that work?
Yeah, we do. It comes through our various programs, Title I. So there is of our particular budget. I haven't run the numbers on exactly what percentage is federal. In the state of California, it's about 10% in 23-24 was federal funding, was for K-12 education. But we do have programs, very specific grants for programs that are federal funds. But I can get you more specific numbers given we're all monitoring that a little more closely.
Yeah, and that would just be helpful to know that percentage, which programs, and how the changes with the administration may or may not affect that funding.
Mhm,
Perfect, thank you.
absolutely.
Are there any other questions for Steve? Steve, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, welcome.
Look forward to getting that additional information. Judy or Vita, any questions from you?
I had one clarification, Steve, on the very last bullet, the one-time student support and professional development block grants. A portion of that also goes to districts, district offices, or does that just go to school districts directly?
Yeah, so it would go to all LEAs, charters,
Okay.
districts, and COEs, that 1.8 billion is broken up according to a formula to all of the LEAs.
Great, thank you.
Thanks again, Steve.
Okay.
Superintendent's report, Susan.
Thank you so much. I think I'd like to first piggyback on Steve's presentation and then move into the superintendent's report. Steve, first, thank you so much for the presentation. And we wanted to have it as an orientation as we move into more of the budget committee meetings and then full board meetings as well. I think one of the questions that comes up in the community a lot has to do with county office funding, and a bit of a question or a misunderstanding or an assumption that money flows from, say, the federal government to the state, to the county, to the districts. Like that's often a flow that people might think happens. And so what Steve really carefully illustrated is that our funding model for a county office is it's set up very differently and separately than for any school district, including charter schools. And the setup of the funding for schools and charter schools really comes primarily from the state. So for the county office, if somebody says, well, then how are you using your funding for districts? Because that's a really great question that somebody might have. An assumption somebody might have is that we take some of our 148 million and take and spread it out and share it amongst districts. That might be an assumption. But the way in which Steve illustrated is what we do with it is we're providing services, those grants that we're saying, yes, we're signing on to do this kind of professional learning in Santa Barbara County by using a $10 million grant, I'm making it up, and then providing the services is how, generally speaking, our services are supporting schools and districts. So differentiated assistance, which we'll talk more over time, the support for local control accountability plans, which is intensive and takes a lot of our time. Those kinds of supports, it isn't flow through money support. It's hiring and building our own leadership and capacity at a county office and being there for our districts and ensuring that they have every question answered and that we can be of support to them. So I say that to illustrate the kind of ways in which we use our funding to support school districts. One other thing I wanted to point out, because you pointed out, Steve, is in a school district, our team are analyzing, reviewing, and then ultimately approving their local control accountability plans. So from Lompoc to Cuyama to Carpinteria, they're putting together their local control accountability plans. And Steve, as you said, I think that one slide showed it's LCFF, which is reported on local control funding formula, which is reported on in LCAP, is like 80% of a school district's funding, And so when we are reviewing and approving, it's really a big plan, a really important, complex plan. The county board reviews our own local control accountability plan, which is tied to our own local control funding formula dollars, which is tied to a smaller portion of the whole pie. And I say that because I just want to keep repeating it, because there's, it's like compare contrast type of thing. And I'm not trying to diminish the importance of our local control accountability plan. That Dr. Simmons is here to present a mid-year report on it today, but it's really specific LCFF funding. And for the plan that you approved, it's around our juvenile court and community school students. So that's kind of the smaller picture, also complex. Lastly, I want to talk about the federal funding, of which I think we should give you a fuller report, like how much federal funding do we get and what does that look like? Steve mentioned is about 10% in the California of local education agencies' budgets. 10% comes from the federal government. But for us, it'll be a portion of title funds for juvenile court and community school. There'll be portions of federal funds that come for early care and education. So we have federal funds that come in to support some of our departments and divisions. And I'm going to say 10% is probably maybe even high for us here at the county education office. So I think it's less than, but we'll be more accurate about that. That's a really great question. Okay, so I wanted to piggyback on Steve's presentation and talk a little bit about that budget, and then pivot now to the report that I provided for you. All right, so a couple of points within, and I will ask the question at some point if you have questions for me on this report. But one, I want to say that what's not in here is that Jonathan Haidt, author of Anxious Generation, is coming to Arts and Lectures February 20th at the Arlington. I think tickets are kind of limited, not really much available, but and I know President Carty is part of bringing Jonathan Haidt here. Did you want to say a word about that before we?
I will say this, yes, the presentation in the evening is largely sold out, but I do have some tickets.
Okay.
So I would just share anybody on the board, anybody at Santa Barbara County Ed office, if they're interested, please let me know. Secondly, the foundation, for which I support, we are convening a group of educators and youth serving mental health nonprofit organizations and just parents engaged in tech reform to a private gathering. And it's going to be a very interactive session with Jonathan Haidt, where we will be able to ask questions directly. And that has been invitation only, but again, I'll extend that to anyone at County Ed or my colleagues. If you'd like to attend, let me know and I'll send you an invitation. It will be from 3 to 4:15 p.m. at the Arlington Theater in the courtyard. We'll be at the Arlington Theater that evening to present. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And just as there's so much in his studies and research and book called Anxious Generation, but one of the things that he talks about, and I'm so interested in hearing about more about, is something that he talks about having, children playing outside and how over time, it seems that we as a society have gotten tighter and tighter around restricting that play. But that restriction on play does not convert over to social media play, for example, for children who are online. And that oftentimes parents who are so concerned about who the children are playing with and where they are, what time they're coming home, don't have the same parameters on that we have outside for social media. So I think that's a really interesting concept. He talks a lot about practical ways in which we might consider how we use social media and what it does for anxiety on this generation. So that's really what he has a lot to say. So we're excited about him coming to Santa Barbara. Also want to acknowledge that everyone traveled in during this stormy day, of course, today. And Judy and Vita and everyone in Santa Maria and everyone here, so appreciate it. And right now we have our communications team, specifically Cami Barnwell, is positioned at the Office of Emergency Management to support communications to all of our school districts, private, public, early care and education. I mean, she's really a conduit for communication. And so she and Dennis Thomas, our safety liaison, and Bridget Boblitz, who's there in Santa Maria, have been huddling to make sure that everyone gets up-to-date information so they can make great decisions around school closures and road closures, et cetera. So none of our public schools are closed today. We have a few private schools that are closed today that I won't go over the list, but it's on our website and we're sharing that out with the Office of Emergency Management. Next, I'd like to piggyback on and say a little bit of what Mary Beth Carty started with this afternoon. Mary Beth, President Carty said the word whiplash, and I want to acknowledge the whiplash and uncertainty and even fear that many in our school communities are feeling. Related to the federal executive orders, the dismantling of programs and whole departments like the Department of Education. And we know that firsthand that the students and families and school employees are feeling these impacts. We took a quick survey, not all of our schools, but dipped into some of our schools countywide. On February 3rd, they reported a decrease in attendance between 10 and 24% that day. We know firsthand that young children are coming to school, and I don't want to say every child. I don't want to be blanketing and generalizing, but students, young children are coming to school with big emotions and are afraid. And so we have been processing too the executive orders, related to the removal of the restrictions on sensitive locations like schools, proposals to redirect federal funds, federal dollars, potential shifts in protections of students, low-income students, immigrant families, LGBTQ plus students. These executive orders absolutely stand to affect the students within our own programs at SBCEO and schools throughout our county and state. The federal ties to education, as Nadra was asking about just a moment ago, they are important. You know, they do serve to support students. They overseeing the Individuals with Disabilities Act, IDEA, has a direct connection to special education supports. It's very, very important. But school accountability and federal ties. But it really is in my point of view, and as I'm looking at the federal impacts, it's the state and the local school districts that have the jurisdiction and make the decisions around curriculum, around personnel, around standards. So I want to say that again, it's not the federal government, it's the state, and it's our local school districts and locally elected board members that are supporting the curriculum, the personnel choices, and the standards within the classrooms. At SBCEO, we are committed to ensuring that every student has equitable access to education and opportunity, and that's absolutely heartfelt, that students are valued as members of our school communities, and that all students and all that they bring and their amazing, diverse experiences, which are their superpowers, as you said, that their identities and their abilities and their aspirations are seen and valued. The county board has adopted 2 board policies. I'd like to distribute those copies so you have them. And I think we may have them here. Yeah. 2021, the board adopted board policy 5125, which you'll get in just a moment, on student records. And in 2023, the board adopted board policy 5022 on student and family private rights. As you get a copy of those, you'll see a portion highlighted, so I won't read the whole thing, but you'll see a portion on one, which is actually repeated on the other. But I do want to read that portion. It says that no information or documents regarding the citizenship or immigration status of students or their family members shall be collected except as required by state or federal law, or required to administer a state or federally supported educational program. The county superintendent or designee shall not disclose student records to a person, agency, or organization for immigration enforcement purposes without parental consent, a court order, or a judicial subpoena. So I wanted you to know what your board policy states for SBCEO as adopted in 2021 and 2023. And as of course our California Constitution affirms, all students and staff of public, primary, elementary, junior high, and senior high schools and community colleges and universities have the inalienable right to attend campuses which are safe, secure, and peaceful. So with that, I point to what is in your board book, the superintendent's report right under the chart, which shows resources that we have on our website, including Know Your Rights workshops, many other resources for families that we've listed on our website and have distributed widely to our community. So wanted to be sure that you knew where I stand, where we stand together as a board through your board policies and the resources we're providing to the community. Okay, moving on to a couple of other items in the superintendent's report. On page 2, the Santa Maria Valley Chamber of Commerce State of Education presentation has been postponed. Just learned about that. I think it was yesterday that we learned that it was postponed. So just want to let you know that. And in your board agenda today, there is still a request to approve reimbursement if you attend as a board member, which I would seek the same to move forward so that it's there when it gets re-calendared. The employee service awards, if you haven't already and can attend, if you'll let Anna know or myself, we will put you into that agenda. And then all other items are very, very important highlights for SBCEO. I do want to pause today on page 5, the cluster of paragraphs at the top related to special education. And to say that right now, you'll see in paragraph 1, it talks about transition meetings for over 550 students. That's preschool students as they transition into transitional kindergarten. It's a huge endeavor by our SBCO special education team to have all of the different support providers around the table to ensure that as they transition from SBCO's preschool programs into districts, transitional kindergarten programs, that transition goes really, really smoothly. So kudos to everyone for their involvement there. Kirsten is also was also in Santa Maria. She may still be there now. And you can see information around the Lompoc Unified transfer as well, which is a big program transfer from SBCEO to Lompoc Unified in their preschool services. So with that, I'll stop and see if you have any questions or comments about my report this month.
Susan,
Judy?
this is Judy.
Hi, I see you.
Mary Beth, hi, this is Judy. I don't know how we're.
I see you both. Yeah, you're both on the screen.
Oh. I just wanted to comment on what you were updating us on regarding communication with schools and our district policies. I was at the community hospital board meeting yesterday for Marion French and Aurora Grande. And one of the things that we realized was we've got to be very careful about telling people that, in the case of our discussion, that the hospitals are a safe place. Because, as you mentioned in the policies, if a judicially processed warrant is presented, then we would comply. We would need to comply with that warrant. It was noted that some warrants are being distributed or shown at schools that are not signed. So one of the things that they were going to do was to make sure that their staff knew what it should look like if it's official and signed. Obviously, all of these things would go through the administration at the facility. An individual teacher or employee would not be dealing with this. It would be dealt with the administrative level. But that resonated with me when you were talking. I think you used the word safe. And I think we need to be very careful that our schools in our county are aware how that could be interpreted and what it really means.
Really great point. We've been having those same discussions as a cabinet team, as also with the superintendents around guaranteed safety of students at school. And of course, we of course comply with the law. Of course we comply with the law. And of course we want every student to have we want students to approach school and to skip and jump and hopscotch and play and be delighted at being there. And that's really what it should be about. But this question around this guaranteed safety piece is something, and the words that we use and what we mean is really important. And our community, I believe, really is looking toward us to say, what do you mean by safety in our schools? So thank you for bringing that forward, Judy.
If I may amend that comment with another observation, at the schools, of course, we have this form that is handled about who a child could be released to. And we need to, I'm just suggesting that we consider how we can best make sure that the name or one of the names that's on that form about who a child can be released to is someone who is, I'll say, documented. Because otherwise, the school would have to call Child Welfare Services or CPS on a child whose contact would not be available. So just another footnote.
Thank you so much, Judy. And I know that there are different organizations, many of whom that you know about. Immigrant Defense Center is one that comes to mind, for example, but there are many others that provide the Know Your Rights workshops for families. And one of the workshop topics that they're talking about is having a family plan. That includes where you go home, where do you go home to, who are you calling, who's on your emergency plan. I'm not saying that to divert the responsibility away from schools, but I'm saying that there are many partner agencies that are talking with families around their family plan as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for your comment, Judy, and for your report, Susan. And thank you again for just lifting up the position of county ed in securing the policies that are in hand and making sure that students know that we want them to feel safe. And I'd like to just commend our teachers for creating that and instilling that feeling of safety. When students arrive for school, they're welcomed in every classroom throughout our county and hopefully throughout our states. And on your comments about the Santa Barbara Immigrant Legal Defense Center, 805 DocuFund has created a rapid response network. And everybody's working in tandem, and indivisible Santa Barbara, indivisible Carpinteria. I'm sure there's North County agencies as well. And we recently had an emergency town hall on Saturday that I was able to attend. Our elected officials, everyone's really got their arms around this issue to the extent that we are able to respond quickly to any ICE sightings. And again, our hearts are with the families that feel fractured and unsettled by this. And we hope that we can just see it through. And we're going to now turn our attention to the consent agenda. A regular exercise each meeting. We've got the minutes from our January 9th meeting, the registration of credentials and certification documents as always, and the declaration of service. And for that, I will need a motion and a second, and then I believe we'll do a roll call. Thank you very much. Anna?
Okay, Mrs. Alvarez Flores,
Aye.
Dr. Armistead,
Aye.
Mrs. Cardy,
Aye.
Ms. Ehrman,
Aye.
Mrs. Frost,
Aye.
Mrs. Reed. Aye. Mr. Walker.
I need to abstain from the minutes. Other than that, it's not.
Okay, motion passed.
Let the minutes reflect. Thank you. We have some action items now, starting with the recommended approval to expand the lease. And there is in your board book an attachment with itemized leases. Super helpful. Thank you for that. And Susan is going to address the need for approval to expand the lease for the facility on South C Street in Lompoc for ECE.
Yes, and I'm going to look towards Steve and Mark if you want to contribute anything here as well. But it is really administrative offices. We just need to expand a couple more. I think it's 2 or 3 office spaces there, and you can see the cost. By the way, the funding would then be provided by the ECE department and not the unrestricted general fund.
Does anyone have questions for Steve on this item? Otherwise, I need a motion to approve.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
guys. Thank you, Nadra. Roll call vote.
Okay, Mrs. Alvarez Flores,
Aye.
Dr. Armistead,
Aye.
Mrs. Cardy,
Aye.
Ms. Ehrman,
Aye.
Mrs. Frost,
Aye.
Mrs. Reed. Aye. And Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 14 is a recommended approval change order. Again, this is continuation of the first floor of curriculum and instruction, that work in progress. Mark is here to answer any questions on that one. The change order is attached in your board book. Mark, do you want to address that?
This has 5 items on it. We are getting close to wrapping this project up. This is just a few loose ends that were unforeseen, things that were found upon opening up the walls and the structure of the project. And we needed to correct them both structurally and aesthetically. And we're down to the last 3 or 4 items that will wrap up this project. It is wrapping up here. I'm hoping to have I'm walking it the middle of March, and we're hoping to have everyone moved in by 1st of April. Furniture is coming in around that time, and so we're really hoping to have everyone moved back in short order. I am tracking 3 or 4 remaining items that are not on this because they are completing now. And so I'll have one more change order to wrap up everything in the next board meeting.
Thank you for your vigilant oversight on this project, Mark. We sure appreciate it. Are there any questions for Mark on the change order?
Man, I guess, I don't know what that means money wise.
Right now, this one has us at about 14.5%, which is about $70,000. I'm looking to finish this up for about another $4,000 to close it out. So we'll be about 15% of the budget. Granted, a large portion of that, 7-8% of it was the asbestos removal that was not captured in the bid project. So I besides that, we're hovering around 7 to 8% of unforeseen additional work overall for the project. So I'm trying to keep it if I had a real project that had the asbestos in it, I'd be keeping this under 10% would be a goal, and trying to maintain that ideology.
Excellent. Do I have a motion to approve this change order? Thank you, Katya. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Sarah. Roll call vote?
Okay, Mrs. Alvarez Flores,
Aye.
Dr. Armistead,
Aye.
Mrs. Cardy,
Aye.
Ms. Ehrman,
Aye.
Mrs. Frost,
Yes.
Mrs. Reed. Aye. Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you, Anna. Per the item that Susan alluded to, we have a couple of events that are coming up, and we need to approve our policy or consider whether to approve a policy of reimbursement of the actual and necessary expenses for board members to attend these items. One is the State of Education event, which is on February 25th. It's a $45 cost for chamber members, $35 for educators, hosted by Santa Maria Valley Chamber of Commerce.
And just as a correction, that one is the one that's been postponed.
It's been
Yeah,
postponed.
yeah,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
that was the, yeah.
That's right. Yes, thank you.
We don't know when it's, we don't know when it's rescheduled, but should anyone choose to attend, there is a cost associated. You can certainly absorb that yourself, but in the event that you're not able to, we're considering a motion to reimburse you. You have a, thank you, Guy.
I'll second.
Thank you, Nadia. Roll call vote.
Okay, Mrs. Alvarez Flores,
Aye.
Dr. Armistead,
Aye.
Mrs. Cardy,
Aye.
Ms. Ehrman,
Aye.
Mrs. Frost,
Aye.
Mrs. Reed. Aye. Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes.
Great. Next item is along the same lines, and this is reimbursing expenses for board members to attend the State of Vandenberg. I don't think that's rescheduled. It's for March 14th. There is a cost for non-members of $60. This is hosted by Lompoc. I'm not sure who's interested in attending, but do I have a motion to reimburse board members?
I so move.
Second.
Thank you, Katya and Guy. Roll call vote.
Okay, Mrs. Alvarez Flores,
Aye.
Dr. Armistead,
Aye.
Mrs. Cardy,
Aye.
Ms. Ehrman,
Aye.
Mrs. Frost,
Aye.
Mrs. Reed. Aye. And Mr. Walker.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Our next item is for information purposes only. It's our personnel report, like every month. And then we have a presentation that is actually a requirement of our 24-25 local control and accountability plan. This is the mid-year monitoring, and I don't see Elise. She's coming right back. She's coming right back. And drum roll, please. And she's on. Thank you, Elise. We're just announcing this mid-year monitoring report for which no action is taken. This is an information item that's mandated. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, Board President Cardy and board members, both here and up in North County. My name is Elise Simmons, and I'm pleased to be here today to present our mid-year LCAP updates. And you received an accompanying report in your board packet, I believe. You're getting the slide presentation as well. And I'm so glad that Steve presented earlier about the budget. So you're going to see how this budget comes to life, essentially, in this report. This report is a collaborative effort. The entire LCAP is one. It's a real group project and not one of those ones where only one person does all the work and the rest try to tag along. We really work collaboratively, closely together. I'd like to appreciate Bridget Boblett, Nicole Everson, Brigida Almquist, and Michelle Sakai-Hart for their support in finalizing the report and information. And then I want to recognize our juvenile court community team, which is Renee Wheeler, Matt Linton, Maria Pacheco, Janelle Hansen. And then I also want to acknowledge our transitional youth services team, which is Amy Willis, Alondra Brothel, and Charmaine Nori for all their contributions. So it is a real big team effort, both for this update that we get in the mid-year, and then also you'll see me again and a lot more of the team in June. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to any questions you may have. There we go. So just before we jump in, I want to give a quick overview of the students that we are providing services to. We have two schools, our court school and our community school, and you'll see the table on the slide that breaks down just some high-level information about both of these schools. The court school, it's also known as Dos Puertas School. It's located at the Juvenile Justice Center in Santa Maria. The students that attend the court school are students that are wards of the court. Any student that is under 18 and or not already graduated elsewhere have to attend school on a daily basis, and they do that within the Juvenile Justice Center. It's grade level 7th through 12th grade. There's 30, as of Monday, there's 30 students there. Looking at last year's data, what's unique about this population is really looking at the enrollment range as well as average length of enrollment. So you'll see that last year it was the low at 15, high 32. Over the year, there was 129 different students in and out. Yeah, so you'll see enrollment seems small, but we see lots of transitions. The average length of enrollment is 40 days for a student. And then the stability rate is 3.9%. What that means is only 3.9% of students are there for a year of learning, like a traditional school year. So that means most of the students are not there for an extended period of time. And the number of classrooms that we have there are 3. For our community school, this school is also known as the Peter B. Fitzgerald Community School, or FITS for short. It's located in Santa Maria and at our North County offices. This school serves students that are expelled youth from the Santa Maria Joint Union High School District, or youth in danger of expulsion, possible attendance issues, maybe some behavior, mostly coming out of, those students are all coming out of the Santa Maria Bonita School District. This school is, there's a MOU between these two school districts, so it's in partnership with them to offer this program for their students. They serve 7th through 12th graders. As of Monday, there was 31 students there. Again, looking at last year's data, we had a low of 13 and a high at 68. Fitz in general, Fitzgerald begins the year very small typically, and then grows throughout the year. Overall, throughout the year, there was 86 students. You can see the average length of enrollment's a little bit longer at 57 days, stability rate a little bit higher at 5.8%, and number of classrooms are 4. There's 2 high school and 2 junior high classrooms. Yes,
Stability rate.
yes.
What does that mean again?
So stability rate is basically, those are the number of students that are there for about a year's worth of learning.
So the court says you need to go to this bill.
Say it again?
The court says you need to go to this bill,
Yes,
100 kids.
Yeah.
You're saying 3.9% of them stay for a year or so.
yes.
The other 97, 96 are there for, hold on.
It could range anywhere from a day to 2 days, all the way up to, we're talking about the 40 days, that's the average, 50 days, 60 days. It really just depends. And they're returning back to their school of attendance generally is where they're going. So it's and that's the same with, in the community school, it's the same thing. These students often, we celebrate they're resolving their expulsion terms
Right.
or improving their attendance, their behavior, and they're going back to their school of attendance.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? And now just a quick overview of what is the local control accountability plan. I'm not going to break down each of these bullet points. I think the first one is the one that I want to highlight and raise up the most, is that the LCAP, or local control accountability plan, it's a 3-year plan. And we just have the luxury of writing a new one. And so this is the first year of that 3-year plan. So when you start to see our action items, some of our metrics, some of these are actually intended to be implemented across the 3 years. And some we're going to implement every year and revise it. So I just want to highlight that. We are in year 1 of the 3-year plan, and we update the plan annually. Very quickly, the LCAP development process, it's a year-long process, and we're always in it. Sort of like what Steve said about how you may be ending one budget as another budget is going. The same thing happens with the LCAP. So we are doing a mid-year update now. We'll do an annual review. As we're reviewing annually, we're also updating a new LCAP. So we're just in this constant cycle, always relying on educational partner feedback, both formally and informally. And we'll report on all of the hows of our feedback in our LCAP annual update in June. But we're talking hours and hundreds of different touch points with different folks across our different partner groups. So just a little about why I'm here today. So the mid-year update is a fairly new thing. And back in 2023, Senate Bill 114 added this requirement for all districts to present a report on the annual update, and as well as a budget overview for parents update on or before February 28th. And the report must include all available mid-year outcome data related to the metrics identified in our 24-25 LCAP, as well as all available mid-year expenditures and implementation data on all actions identified in the 24-25 LCAP. And that's what you're going to see in that expanded report that you have there in your board packet. In terms of the budget overview for parents, an update on that. Remember Steve's presentation about there's the total LCFF funds. And then you'll notice the next line is total LCFF funds generated by JCCS and then supplemental. So this is a smaller piece of the overall pie. And I will say that there is a new template. So when we report in June, it's going to be more clear for our public about, especially for our county education offices, just giving a clearer picture of how the funds are being used. So back adopted in June 2024, these were the numbers we had. And at our first interim budget report, you'll see the adjustment there. And these two adjustments, you'll see that there is more LCFF funds, and that had to do with an increase in property taxes, which of course, you know, we had to give back, right? But you'll see that we got an increase there, and then you'll see a reduction in the total LCFF funds, and that's because of an ADA adjustment. We have less students attending both of those programs, and that's even with a 3-year average. So you'll see that more in one area and less in another. Okay. Broad overview of our LCAP. We have 5 goals in our LCAP. 4 are listed right here. I'll share a 5th one in a moment. We have 3 broad goals and 1 maintenance. You'll see that our goals 1, 2, and 4 are directly to support our juvenile court and community school and their students and families and staff there. And then goal 3, this is for our coordination of services for our foster youth that is led by our transitional youth services departments. And then our 5th goal, this is a new goal that the equity multiplier funds happened starting last year. And so we had to develop a focus goal around a specific group, and it's around the student groups that have the lowest performance level on 1 or more state indicators. And those were our court school students and their suspension rates. And so you'll see we have goal number 5 here for us. That's specifically, again, for our court students, but you'll notice we've written it so it's to cover all of our court and community students. We can broaden it a little bit. So this goal actually, I will tell you, will change. When you see me in June, you'll see that this will be a slightly different goal because, again, we have to make sure that our equity multiplier funds are serving student groups that have the lowest performance level. And so we're looking at our dashboard, and that changes every year, depending on how our students do. So when we're at the mid-year, we look at metrics, and there's basically 3 answers for how we know about our metrics. They're either the outcome is unknown, the outcome is in progress, or the outcome is known. And that really has to do with the type of metric. You're going to see that if we're talking about CASP data, standardized test data, we know that because we're using last year's. So those are going to be our known outcomes. You might see an outcome that's in progress, like our attendance data. We're looking at that. We could look at that monthly and daily. And so we're tracking that. And then some of our outcome, we just don't know yet. For example, the California Healthy Kids Survey, we don't have that data yet. So it's unknown at this time. It will be known when we look at it for our annual update for the LCAP. So in that report, you'll see a section about how it'll have every single metric, which includes our baseline. And then you'll see the peach column, that's our mid-year outcome data. And you'll notice that there's nothing written in year 1 outcome or year 2, because again, we are in the middle of our year 1. In terms of our LCAP expenditures and implementation, especially our implementation, we really have 4 answers here, but you'll see 2 of them are lumped together. We have that we have not implemented an action item. We have planned or partially implemented an action item, and we have fully implemented. And that's going to depend on the action item itself. And those will also then impact the expenditures as well. And when you look at the report, you'll notice that there's a lot more peach columns for this section, and you'll see the implementation level for each action item, the mid-year outcome data, other data or evidence that we may have. That's where we also write description in there, trying to explain, why it's unknown or why it's not being partially funded. You'll see some explanation there, and then you'll see our mid-year expenditures. Okay. I'm going to do a quick overview of where we're at within each goal and how we are tracking at the mid-year. So LCAP goal number 1, as a reminder, is specifically for our juvenile court and community school students. You can see the goal there about demonstrating grade level content standards and will be prepared for college and or career, and it meets state priorities 2, 4, 7, and 8. In terms of metrics, we have 1 unknown, 17 in progress, and 7 known. In terms of actions, we have 0 that have not been implemented, 15 that are planned or partially implemented, and 4 fully implemented. And then you can see our expenditures. We had planned almost 2.1 million roughly, and then up through December 31st, we have spent $972,561 change. Do the same thing for each goal. So I'll go quickly through this. LCAP goal number 2. This one again is specifically for juvenile court and community school students and families and staff. And this one is in collaboration with the staff and the community. Students and families will be provided with services to address individual needs and support students in overcoming barriers impacting their education. And this is supporting priorities 3, 5, and 6. For metrics, 4 are unknown, 11 in progress, 0 are known. And for actions, 1 has not been implemented, 14 are planned or partially implemented, and 2 are fully implemented. And you can see our planned expenditures there. We planned on spending roughly throughout the year $600,000, and we have spent $132,000. Goal 3, this is specifically for the coordination of services for our foster youth led by our transitional youth division, transitional youth services division. And their goal, this one is all foster youth across our county will be provided a system of support that includes targeted services that address barriers impacting their education. Strengthening the system of support for foster youth will result in reduced suspension rates, improved attendance, and increased graduation rate. And this is specifically priority 10. And the metrics there, you can see how we're progressing. I'm not going to read each one for you all now. I think you get the pattern now, right? Okay. Goal 4 is our maintenance. This is where you'll see, and you know it's in maintenance because this is the word continue, to successfully implement programs that support basic conditions for learning. And this meets priority 1 and expelled youth priority 9. And again, you can see how we're doing in terms of metrics, actions, and expenditures. And last but not least, our equity multiplier goal. Within 3 years, and this is specifically for juvenile court and community schools, we'll reduce the rates of suspension for Hispanic Latino students by implementing actions that promote relationships, student connectedness, and student voice, priority 6. Again, you can see how we're doing with metrics, actions, and expenditures. So lots of boxes and numbers. Now let's look at what it looks like in life, real life. Here's some great pictures. I just wanted to thank you to Renee and Matt and comms. So these are some images that just highlight what's happened already this year. You can see here some words of wisdom from our students. They participate in the Great Kindness Challenge. So that getting outside and play and that beautification. So one of the things you'll see as one of the actions is the student beautification. One of my favorite ones, we didn't capture it because it was on a video, was be kinder than you feel, which I thought, wow, that is really wise. Sometimes hard, but great, right? Can you imagine if everyone was just kinder than how? Okay, sorry, tangent. One of the action items was to really focus on the gym. Again, letting students get out and play and have a space where they could just be active. This space started to become sort of a storage area for some things. And so over the summer, they did a great job cleaning it out and then purchasing more PE equipment.
In here? It's huge.
Talking about playing, it's getting your hands dirty in the dirt, right? And so here we have 2 examples of some student-led campus beautification projects, both at Fitzgerald and Dos Puertas. Family Parent Engagement Night. This is just one of many. And I know that Director Renee Wheeler is up north. She's there and up there. So she can jump in and answer any questions. But she had, throughout the last year and a half, the level of parent engagement has just really skyrocketed. And that's partially because of many different hands and help in making personal contacts and getting families to come in and learn and also give input. Here we have the JCCS staff participating in team building and professional learning. They blindfolded themselves, which is even more interesting. I love that. Real trust. Student created Dia de los Muertos altar at Fitzgerald. And then we have our career technical education classrooms and materials, both at each school has both a CTE program and pathway. And then I could not forget about our transitional youth services. They coordinated a mental health first aid training for our district liaisons held here at in our auditorium. So I just wanted to bring it to life for you all, some of the highlights. Next steps. So we are now in the process of preparing for the annual review of the 24-25 LCAP and we'll also revise our LCAP for the 25-26 school year. Over the next several months, we'll analyze some data. We're going to get more known data as it rolls in. We'll spend time looking at that data with educational partners and JCCS staff. We're going to use that data to evaluate the effectiveness of our current LCAP goals and actions, meet with educational partners to gather feedback, review and possibly revise our metrics and actions for next year's LCAP. And then we'll be here to present the annual update as well as our new LCAP for you all for adoption, questions and adoption in June. There we go. Thank you. If you have any questions, just let me know and we'll gladly answer them. And then we also, again, we have Renee up in the Santa Maria space. It's up there too as well if you have any questions for her and specifically the juvenile court and community school program.
Do we have any questions from North County? I'll ask
This
you
is
first.
Judy. I just wanted to say that was an excellent presentation. You've got a great team, and I love hearing reports like that about programs like LCFF. You've broken it down very well and very clearly. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you. And this is Vita. I just want to take a look one of these times because
We can go back and.
I know, I didn't realize that gym was that big. A couple of my former students have ended up here. They have, and so I visited in a smaller classroom, but it's just, you don't know what you have until you see it in a different perspective. So
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone else has ever been to the campus and actually had a visit.
It still had storage in it when I saw
Okay.
it last.
I'll chime in really quickly that next month, the board will be meeting in Santa Maria. And so one of the thoughts we had to your question and comment, Vita, is to take a few moments and tour Farnell Road and see the school and the facilities at the same time. So
Thank
to be
you.
continued in March.
Appreciate it.
I just kind of wanted to piggyback on that. A couple years ago, we were able to see Fitzgerald, and we were also able to see the CCS school, and just wondering if there would be a possibility to maybe do another tour separate from the board meeting for anyone who's interested.
Thank you. And that comment, I think, is mostly specific to the Juvenile Justice Center in Santa Maria. And the last time the board toured it was tricky because it was in the midst of COVID regulations, rules, and who can go in and who can't go in. Probation Chief Holly Benton will be at the March board meeting as well to provide a presentation of how are things going at the Juvenile Justice Center. And before she attends, I'll connect with her about a potential board visit to JJC, not for March, but at a time coming soon. Yeah, it's a really good, great idea. Thank you. JJC.
Do we
Juvenile Justice
follow
Center.
any of these students after they leave our program?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Do we follow any of the students
Oh.
after we leave their program?
Mhm.
I'm gonna let Renee answer that because she knows it more intimately. Did you catch the question, Renee?
I believe it was, do we follow them after they leave?
Yes.
So we have a small portion of students who transition from the JJC to Fitzgerald. So that would be the easiest population for us to follow. And then once they graduate, we do follow them for 6 months to see if they are gainfully employed, if they are enrolled in a college program or a workforce trade type program. But that is the extent to which we're allowed to follow them.
Well,
Did
I
that
mean,
answer your question?
I'm
Is that because
wondering-
of the age at 18 or that's it? Yeah, okay.
are we interested in the effectiveness of our program? So they go through, then they leave us.
Right, so. Could you ask that question again, please?
Is your mic on, Guy?
Yes,
Could you stand, could you move closer to it perhaps?
yes, Judy.
Thank you, Guy.
The reason I'm asking is I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for us to measure the effectiveness of our program. So in other words, students come, they go through the process, they leave, and then we follow. Are they doing, are our programs effective? Are they helping them? Are they getting better? Are they getting stronger? So that's why I'm asking.
We do that mostly through, we do track for recidivism, which is how, if they come back to us at either one of our programs. But while they are with us, we do evaluate their transcripts and really put a concerted effort into accelerating their learning to get them back on track. Because the majority of our students do come to us credit deficient. And then we also enroll them in our CTE program and really do try to set them up for success for when they leave us so that they do not keep returning.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further questions for Elise or comments? Thank you so much. It's a great report. And I love the photos because it does bring life to the data. No further questions. At this time, we are going to adjourn our public meeting to a closed session.